The moment the mermaid's body hit the sand, her eyes wide with betrayal, the river hissed and turned muddy. Her golden hair spread across the bank like dying grass, and every drumbeat of celebration turned into wails of fear. They had thought her death would bring freedom, but instead, it carried a curse. And the river that once fed them began to shrink before their very eyes. Welcome back. As you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also share with your friends. Now back to the story. The river had always been the pride of Oak Village. Every morning, women in bright ankara skirts carried clay pots on their heads and walked down its sandy path. Children played at the shallow banks, splashing one another while the older men cast their nets, hoping for tilapia and catfish. Life in Oak was tied to the river like breath is tied to the lungs. Without it, the village could not survive. But one season, a strange arrogance began to rise among a group of hunters. At the heart of this group was Daniel, tall and broad-shouldered, who wore a deep blue dashiki embroidered with golden threads whenever he went to the market. His closest friends were Peter, whose laughter was loud and biting, and Joseph, a younger hunter eager to prove himself. Together, they made a name for themselves, not only for their skill with bows and spears but also for their constant bragging. They would return from the forest carrying antelopes slung across their shoulders or wild boars tied to wooden poles. Instead of giving thanks at the shrine like other hunters, they mocked. Why pour palm oil for the gods? Peter once said aloud at the village square, tossing a piece of roasted bushmeat into his mouth. It is my spear that brought down the beast, not some spirit hiding in a tree. The elders frowned at his words, but the younger men clapped and cheered. Slowly, a pride began to grow in their circle. They wore Kent sashes across their shoulders, the colors bright and loud, as if daring anyone to challenge their boldness. One evening, as the sun bent low and painted the sky in burnt orange, the three hunters sat by the riverside polishing their spears. Women walked past with clay pots on their heads, avoiding their eyes. Everyone in the village knew the hunters were growing reckless. Daniel stretched out his legs and spat into the river. This water, people say it belongs to spirits. I say it belongs to us. We drink it, we fish in it, we wash in it. If there is a spirit here, let her come out and face us. Joseph laughed nervously. Daniel, don't say that. They say the river has a keeper. My mother told me of it when I was a boy. Peter slapped him on the back. Your mother also told you if you whistled at night the dead would answer. Did that ever happen? Forget these stories. We are men now, not children hiding under mats. But their laughter was cut short. That evening, when the moon rose bright and full, a sound drifted across the river. It was a song, soft, pulling, like the cry of a flute carried on wind. The hunters fell silent. Out of the water rose a figure, her skin glowing faintly as though touched by moonlight. Her long black hair dripped with river water, her eyes deep and strange. She was neither fully human nor fully beast. Joseph's jaw dropped. It is true. The mermaid's gaze moved slowly from one hunter to the other. She spoke, her voice calm but heavy. You dare mock what you do not understand. This river feeds you, this river shields you, yet you spit into it. Instead of bowing in fear, Daniel stood, spear in hand. Pride stiffened his face. So it is true. A river which does live here. But look at you. What can you do against men of Oak? The villagers later said the river fell silent at that moment, as if the water itself held its breath. The hunters, drunk with arrogance, did not stop there. Peter picked up a stone and tossed it into the water, grinning. If you are truly a spirit, then fight us. If not, then you are just a fish with a woman's face. The mermaid's eyes glistened, and for a moment sorrow crossed her face. But then her voice shook with warning. You will pay for this mockery. Your laughter will turn to wailing, and your strength to dust. Joseph trembled, but Daniel lifted his spear high. Empty threats. My spear fears no spirit. With that, he lunged forward and hurled the spear. The weapon cut through the night air and struck the mermaid across the shoulder. A cry tore out of her mouth, echoing across the water like thunder. The river churned, waves rising as though stirred by a storm. The hunters froze as the glow around her dimmed. With one last look, filled with pain and fury, the mermaid sank beneath the surface. Silence returned. The hunters looked at each other, breathing hard. Then Daniel smirked. So much for spirits. They walked back to the village that night, boasting loudly. The people listened in fear, but no one dared speak. Yet, as dawn broke the next morning, the first signs of calamity appeared. The river's surface had shrunk back, leaving cracks in the earth where water once flowed. Fish lay gasping in the mud, and women who came to fetch water cried out in panic. The river was drying. And that was only the beginning. At first, the villagers thought it was only the season. Sometimes, during harmattan, the river pulled back a little, its banks cracked with heat, then returned when the rains came. But by the third day after the mermaid's death, fear began to spread. The river had shrunk even further, leaving behind only shallow pools where frogs croaked restlessly. Women who dipped their pots came back with nothing but mud. Children stared at the empty stretch where they once played, their laughter replaced with silence. Elder Ruth, one of the oldest women in the village, shook her head as she stood at the bank. She wore a faded kaftan, its sleeves wide, the cloth patterned with brown and red swirls. "This is no season," she muttered. "Something has angered the river. Something terrible." The villagers began to whisper. Some blamed witches. Others accused strangers who had passed through the market a week earlier. But the rumor that spread the fastest was the one about Daniel, Peter, and Joseph. A young boy who had followed them secretly that night swore he saw them talking to a glowing woman by the water, then throwing a spear. His story spread from one ear to another until even the chief himself could not ignore it. The hunters, however, refused to be silent. Daniel still walked proudly, his red Kent sash across his chest, while Peter laughed at anyone who dared question him. "The river is shrinking because of the sun, not because of us. Do you think we are children who believe in fairy tales?" But Joseph could no longer sleep. At night, he heard the cry of the mermaid in his dreams. He saw her eyes, deep and sorrowful, and woke up drenched in sweat. His mother noticed his restlessness and pulled him aside. "My son, what did you and your friends do?" Joseph shook his head, but tears betrayed him. He could not confess, yet he could not deny either. By the end of the week, disaster deepened. The crops that grew near the riverbank, yam, maize, cassava, began to wither. Farmers complained their soil had hardened like stone. Fishermen returned empty-handed, their nets filled only with weeds and sand. Goats bleated in thirst, and cattle refused to graze. The chief, David, called a meeting in the village square. The men wore dashikis of every color, women tied headscarves with ankara prints, and children clung to their mothers' wrappers. The air was heavy with worry. Chief David stood, his tall frame wrapped in a green and yellow Kent cloth. His voice was strong, but grief colored his words. "This river has been our life since the days of our forefathers. Without it, we are nothing. The spirits are angry. We must know why." An elder spoke up. "We have heard the hunters mocked the river spirit. If that is true, then the fault is theirs." Daniel stepped forward, his chin high. "I will not be accused of lies. We saw no spirit, only the water. These are old women's tales." But Joseph's knees trembled. His heart pounded as if trying to leap out of his chest. He could not bear the eyes of the villagers on him, could not bear the guilt pressing his chest like a heavy stone. He wanted to speak, but fear held his tongue. That night, as the village slept, another sign appeared. From the dry riverbed rose a stench, strong and bitter. Dead fish, rotting fast, covered the mud. The smell drifted into every home, forcing families to cover their noses with cloth. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers muttered curses, and the children cried. On the fourth night, Joseph could no longer contain himself. He rushed to Daniel's compound, his voice shaking. "Daniel, we must confess. The river is dying because of what we did. I hear her cry every night. She cursed us." Daniel, seated with a gourd of palm wine, scoffed. "You are weak, Joseph. Do you want the whole village to laugh at us? Spirits cannot curse men like us. Sleep, and your dreams will fade. But Joseph could not sleep. He walked alone to the dried-up bank and stared at the cracked mud, the moonlight falling on the emptiness. He fell to his knees and whispered, "If you can hear me, forgive me. Forgive me, please." The wind stirred suddenly, cold against his face. A ripple moved across one of the shallow pools left behind. And then he heard it, a faint voice, soft but sharp, as if carried from beneath the earth itself. Too late. Joseph staggered back in terror, his chest tight. He ran home, trembling, knowing the curse was real. But he did not know how much worse it was about to become. Because the river was not just drying. Something else was waking. The morning after Joseph heard the voice at the river, Oak Village woke to another horror. One of the hunter's children had vanished. Peter's youngest son, Samuel, a boy of only 6, had been sleeping beside his mother. At dawn, when she reached to wake him, the mat was empty. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, only the faint sound of water dripping outside their hut even though the river was dry. The village gathered quickly, voices raised in fear. Women tied their wrappers tightly, their hair scarves barely holding back their trembling. Men carried sticks, spears, and lanterns as they searched every corner. But Samuel was nowhere. Peter raged like a wounded lion, his dashiki half open as he shouted at the crowd. "Who took my boy? If I find the thief, I will tear him apart with my bare hands." But Elder Ruth stepped forward slowly, leaning on her staff. "This is no thief, Peter. The river is taking what was promised to it. You mocked the spirit. Now she takes what is most precious to you." Her words cut the air like a knife. Some villagers nodded, whispering, while others shrank back in silence. Peter's face darkened, but his pride did not bend. "Old woman, hold your tongue. My son is not a sacrifice. I will find him." By evening, a strange chill spread through the village. Mothers held their children close, fathers barred their doors, but sleep brought no peace. That night, Joseph's mother woke to find her grandson missing from his mat. Another child gone. Joseph collapsed in grief. He tore at his anchor top until it ripped across the chest. "It is my fault," he cried before the chief and elders. "The river spirit warned us. We mocked her, and Daniel struck her down. Now she is taking our children." The square erupted in chaos. Some villagers shouted at Daniel, others at Peter, but many were too afraid to even speak. The truth had been spoken, and no one could deny it. Daniel, however, stood defiant. His tall frame wrapped in Kent, he sneered at Joseph. "So this is how you repay me, Joseph? By spreading lies to cover your own fear? A fishwoman cannot steal our children. This is the work of thieves or witches hiding among us." But his words no longer carried the same power. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Mothers pulled their children away when he passed. Farmers muttered curses under their breath. The pride of the hunters was turning to shame. On the 5th night, Daniel himself woke to the sound of splashing. He sat up quickly, his heart pounding, and looked across his hut. His daughter, Ruth, only 9 years old, was no longer on her mat. The door of the hut swung open gently though he had bolted it. Outside, he heard the faint sound of singing, low, sorrowful, carrying across the air. He ran barefoot through the dark, calling his daughter's name. The villagers woke to his cries and followed with lanterns. Their flickering flames lit the dry riverbed, cracked and barren, until they reached one of the shallow pools. There, the children's footprints stopped. The pool shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and the singing faded. Ruth was gone. Daniel dropped to his knees, his chest heaving. For the first time, his pride cracked. His voice shook as he whispered, "She has taken my child." The village was gripped by terror. 3 children gone in less than a week, and the river still shrinking. The elders gathered in the chief's hut, the air heavy with palm oil lamps and silence. Chief David spoke at last, his kaftan loose on his shoulders, his face lined with worry. "We cannot survive without the river. We cannot endure while our children vanish. The hunters have brought this curse upon us, but the punishment falls on us all. We must find a way to appease the spirit. An old priestess named Miriam, her head wrapped in faded ankara, lifted her staff. The spirit will not be appeased by words. A life was taken. Blood was spilled. Until the hunters surrender, the river will not forgive. The hunters sat apart, silent. Joseph wept openly, Peter clenched his fists in rage, and Daniel stared blankly at the ground, his daughter's face haunting him. But the worst was yet to come. For that night, the singing returned, not outside, but inside the hunters' dreams. Each of them saw the mermaid, her shoulder still bleeding where the spear had struck. She walked through their huts as though walls were nothing, her eyes deep pools of sorrow and fury. Her voice filled their minds. You mocked me. You shed my blood. Now the river turns away from you. One by one, your children will return to me. Until you bow, oak will wither. The hunters woke screaming, their bodies drenched in sweat, their wives trembling beside them. The curse was no longer a rumor. It was a shadow inside every home. And by dawn, another child was gone. The morning after the fourth child disappeared, Oak Village was no longer the same. Women no longer sang on their way to the market. The sound of pestles pounding yam fell silent. Even the goats that usually wandered the square seemed restless, bleating without pause. Everywhere, people whispered only one word, curse. The chief called another gathering beneath the old baobab tree. The elders came with their walking sticks, women tied their ankara wrappers tighter, and the hunters stood apart, heads bowed. The air was heavy, as if the village itself held its breath. Chief David raised his hand. His green kaftan was plain, unlike his usual bright Kent cloth, and his face looked older than it had in weeks. We can no longer hide from the truth, he said. The river has turned against us. Our children are being taken. The curse came because of the hunter's pride. A murmur swept the crowd. Some shouted in agreement, others cried for mercy. Then an elder woman, Elder Ruth, stepped forward. Her voice was thin but sharp. 4 children gone. The land is dry, the fish are dead. How long shall we suffer? If the hunters brought this evil, then let the hunters pay for it. The crowd roared. Some demanded the hunters be cast out. Others said they should be handed over to the river spirit. The sound rose like thunder until Chief David had to strike his staff on the ground to silence them. Daniel stood slowly, his face drawn, his Kent sash dull under the harsh sun. His voice, once proud, now cracked. I was wrong. I mocked the spirit, and I struck her. But she is not only punishing me, she punishes us all. My daughter is gone. I feel her absence with every breath. For a moment, there was silence. Even the birds seemed to stop. Daniel's confession was the weight everyone had been waiting for. Yet, instead of softening the crowd, it hardened them. Then give yourself to the river, a man shouted. If you killed her, let her take you instead of our children. Yes, another woman cried, clutching her son's hand tightly. Let the river swallow the hunters. Only then will our children return. Peter, trembling with rage, lifted his spear. Do you think I will walk into the river like a goat to slaughter? If the spirit wants me, let her come and take me. But his words only fueled the fire. Stones began to fly from the edges of the crowd, striking the ground near the hunters. The chief's guards quickly stepped forward, forming a barrier to protect them. Enough! Chief David roared. Blood spilled in anger will only worsen our curse. We must think wisely. That night, the elders gathered in the chief's hut. Oil lamps flickered against the mud walls as the priestess Miriam entered. Her hair was gray, her robe a faded dashiki that touched the ground. She leaned on her staff, her eyes sharp despite her age. The spirit does not want the whole village, she said. She wants those who mocked her. She wants the hunters. Unless they are offered, the river will not return. Her words fell heavy. Some nodded quickly. Others shifted uneasily. Joseph, who had been silent until then, fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. Let me go. I mocked her, but my heart was never proud like theirs. I will give myself to her if it means the children will be spared." His mother wailed, clutching at his shoulders, but the elders looked at him with something close to respect. Still, Daniel rose and shook his head. "No, I struck her. It was my spear. If anyone must pay, it is me." His voice shook, but his eyes did not waver. Peter slammed his fist against the wall. "You speak like cowards. Spirits do not take men. They take children because we are too strong. If we bow now, the whole village will live on its knees forever." The chief watched silently, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow, at dawn, we will go to the river. The hunters will stand before it. If the spirit wants them, let her take them. If not, then we shall know this curse is beyond us." Word spread quickly through the village. By nightfall, the air was thick with tension. Mothers prayed, fathers sharpened their knives, and children were kept inside. Some villagers packed their belongings quietly, ready to flee if the curse grew worse. The hunters sat apart in their compounds. Joseph wept into his mother's lap. Daniel held his daughter's beaded anklet in his hand, staring at it until his vision blurred. Peter sat sharpening his spear, his pride burning even as fear shadowed his eyes. And when midnight came, the singing returned, low, mournful, and carried on the wind. Every villager heard it. Even those who tried to block their ears felt the melody in their chest. The spirit was waiting. At dawn, the whole village gathered by the dried riverbed. The sky was pale, the air heavy, as if the land itself held its breath. Mothers clutched their children tightly, elders leaned on their staffs, and the chief stood solemn in a plain kaftan, his face hard with sorrow. The hunters were brought forward. Daniel walked slowly, carrying his daughter's anklet in his palm. Joseph stumbled, his eyes red from weeping. Peter, however, still gripped his spear, though his hands trembled slightly. The priestess Miriam stepped into the cracked bed of the river. She lifted her staff high and called out, "Spirit of the river, hear us. We bring before you those who mocked and wounded you. If their blood will satisfy your anger, take them. But if there is another way, show mercy." The villagers fell into silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ground shook. From the shallow pools that remained, water surged upward, swirling violently. A figure rose from the flood, the mermaid, her wound still bleeding, her eyes burning with sorrow and fury. Children screamed. Women fell to their knees. The hunters froze, their pride stripped away. The mermaid's voice rang out, echoing across the dry land. "You mocked me. You shed my blood. You thought yourselves greater than the river. For your arrogance, your children walk with me beneath the waters. They call your names in sorrow." Daniel dropped to his knees, tears running down his face. "Take me. Spare the others. Spare the village. It was my spear that struck you." Joseph crawled beside him, pressing his forehead to the cracked mud. "Forgive us. We were blind, foolish. If you must take us, then let it be now. Only return the children." Peter stood tall, his chest heaving. "You cannot take me. I fear no spirit." He raised his spear high, but before he could throw it, the ground beneath him cracked. A surge of water rose like a hand, striking him down. His spear flew from his grip as he was swallowed into the pool. His scream echoed once, then silence. The crowd wailed in terror. Mothers covered their children's eyes. The mermaid's gaze softened as it turned to Daniel and Joseph. "You bowed. You confessed. That is enough." She stretched her hand over the water. Slowly, the pools rippled, and shapes began to rise, small, fragile figures covered in water. One by one, the missing children emerged, their eyes closed as if waking from a long sleep. Samuel, Ruth, and the others gasped for breath as the villagers rushed forward, crying with joy. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers fell to the ground in gratitude. The mermaid turned her gaze to Daniel and Joseph. "You will live, but never forget. Every child of Oak will carry the story of this curse. Teach them that pride kills and humility saves." With that, she sank back into the waters. The pools spread, flowing outward, filling the cracks. Before the villagers' eyes, the river returned, its surface glittering beneath the morning sun. Fish leapt from the current as if celebrating. The land sighed with relief. The people fell to their knees, thanking the spirit, thanking the river. The chief raised his hands. We have learned. We will never mock the river again. From today, Oak will honor the water that gives us life. Daniel wept openly as he held his daughter. Joseph clung to his mother. The hunter's pride was gone, replaced with a weight that would never leave them. As the days passed, the village slowly healed. Crops greened again, animals drank from the river, and laughter returned to the children. But at every festival, a gourd of palm wine was poured at the river's edge, a reminder of the mermaid who had once wept and punished them. And so the story spread, from mouth to mouth, from elder to child. Never mock the river, never mock the spirits that guard it. For pride destroys, but humility saves. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe and turn on your notification for more. See you soon.